Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this interesting talk today. We are the Wandering Wildlife Society, a part of Estes Valley Watershed Coalition, and we're the ones who restored the watershed after the 2013 flood. And today we continue maintaining that river, those rivers, our whole watershed, with grants. We've gotten about $5 million in grants over the years to repair the watershed. That means adding boulders into the rivers so they meander more. And now fire mitigation. We're doing forestry work. The grants continue. So I'm delighted that you've joined us. Our talk today is from Jean Lever, who is the Water Commissioner for Big Thompson. She's going to explain how the water moves and is restored throughout our valley. Thanks for coming.
Okay, I'm assuming everybody at home can see the larger PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so my name is Jean Lever. I'm the Thompson River Basin's Water Commissioner, Big Thompson, Little Thompson. What that means is, which one am I hitting? This one. Nope. Okay, I thought we were hitting one or the other of these two.
Yeah, so let's figure what's going on here.
Okay.
Can everybody still see that?
Okay, there we go. All right, so we're hitting the down arrow, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's start again. Okay. So I work for the state of Colorado. We are part of the Department of Natural Resources. As you can see on your screen, there are 8 divisions under the Natural Resources Department in Colorado. We're the one in the far end, water resources. So we're not parks and wildlife, we're not forestry, we don't do water conservation, which often surprises folks. We actually are about the laws of the water in the state of Colorado and the administration and the management of the water and the laws of the water. So it's actually the position of Water Commissioner and the State Engineer's Office. So Department of Water Resources or Division of Water Resources equals State Engineer's Office. Got nothing to do with roads and bridges and structures. State Engineer's Office anywhere in the Western United States are the folks who deal with the administration of water. As you can see, the actual first Water Commissioner job was created in 1879. Everybody thinks it, in fact, was the Water Commissioner job for District 3 and District 4. District 3 is the Poudre Basin, District 4 is this basin, the Big Thompson. And the myth is that the guy lived somewhere roughly where the Larimer County landfill is now, and one day he would ride his horse up to the Poudre and measure the flow in the river there, and the next day he'd drive down to the Big Thompson and measure the water in the canyon there. And that's the theory. That was the first person who actually had the Water Commissioner job as a full-time job. It's been around for a while. So what do we do? First and foremost, what we do is we do water administration. And we're going to talk about what that means quite a lot more. In addition to that, the other primary roles that the Department of Water Resources have is interstate compacts and decrees. So it's Laramie River Compact, it's the South Platte Basin Compact, which is the water that goes out to Nebraska. It is, of course, the Colorado River Compact, which I'm sure you all at least know of. It's hydrographic measurement, both of the streams and the rivers, but also to a fairly significant extent of the diversions off the streams of the rivers, the ditch head gates, municipal diversions, things like that. In other words, what we're doing is we're not only quantifying how much water is in the river, but we're also making sure that when water is taken off the river for a use, you're only taking what you should be taking and not any more. Public safety is dams and wells. Physically, the structure of a dam needs to be safe. Wells, again, the structure of a well needs to be safe. In addition, for wells, we also do the well permitting, which is a whole realm unto itself, really. And then finally, like all state agencies, public information and record keeping. So before I get into water in Colorado specifically, I thought, well, let's just take a big picture look at the governance of water in the entire country. So you can see that on the east 2/5 of the country, the doctrine that governs the use of water there is called the Riparian Doctrine. And then for the other 3/5 of the west side of the country, it's the doctrine that we live under, which is the prior appropriation system. So the Riparian Doctrine is something that really came over from Europe. And it's something that's been sort of codified into, the development of law in Europe for hundreds of years. And essentially what it says is that the land and the water go together. If you've got a stream that runs through your property or across your property, if your property abuts water, there is the presumption that you have the right to the use of that water. That is not the world that you and I sitting here today live in at all. But it is, it's how things came over from Europe, and really how it changed. When I was in college, we heard something what people would refer to as the 100th meridian. And the 100th meridian roughly runs kind of north-south through sort of the west part of Nebraska. And the notion is if you live on the east side of the 100th meridian, there is enough natural precipitation that you can grow crops without having a supplemental source of irrigation. But if you live on the west side of the 100th meridian, you have to have a supplemental source of irrigation to grow crops, meaning you have to create ditches to pull the water off the river. You have to have reservoirs that hold water in times of excess and it can be used later. And so, that the Riparian Doctrine has held in the east side of the country because there is enough water. Once you're really moving through Nebraska and westward, as we all know, there is not enough water. So it created a different kind of doctrine. And really what the prior appropriation doctrine does is it separates land ownership and land use from the right to use the water that may be flowing across that land. So it created something which we call, as I said, the prior appropriation doctrine, which typically gets called first in time, first in line. So basically what this is if you are a user of water, you go to the courts, you establish that you are a user of water from that date, for the particular purpose from that date onward. You get a position in a line. If somebody went to the courts before you and established a use before you from that same stream system, they're ahead of you in line. They get water before you. Someone comes after you, they're behind you. You get your water before them. But the point here is, just because you have water crossing your land, it no longer means you have any right to the use of that water. If you want to have the right to use that water, you essentially have to go through a court process to establish your position in that line. So in Colorado, as it says there, first to use the water is entitled to use it first. But we've modified that now. It's not just simply when you can show you started to use the water, it's also now when you've actually gone to court and got it adjudicated. And the theory here is You can't step in now and say, hey, I've been using this water for the last 140 years. Give me a water right that goes back to 1880, when you haven't bothered to go to court for the past 140 years and actually establish that your place in that line. No. If you go to court now, even if you can show that you've been using the water for many, many years, you will get a 2022 water right. Because we want to not penalize people for doing what the law of the state of Colorado said you needed to do in order to establish a right to use the water. And that is, you've got to go to court, you've got to get a decree, you've got to establish your place in that line. Water rights are usufructory. That's not just in the Western United States, it's all the United States, and in fact in most places in the world, which basically means you do not own the water. You own the right to the use of the water. So essentially, the state holds water for the benefit of the people of the state. And when you get a water right, what you are getting is a right to the use of the water, not the actual ownership of the water itself. So Colorado and the prior appropriation doctrine is very important. Basically, Colorado is really where the nuts and bolts of this as a philosophy got worked out first. I think mainly because we may have had a larger ingrowth of population earlier than, say, maybe Wyoming and Utah and other places like that. But right back then in 1864, when our state was being established, right from the get-go, they said, no, we're not going to work on, we recognize there isn't enough water and there's not going to be enough water. We're not going to work on the Riparian Doctrine, we're going to work on this prior appropriation doctrine. It was challenged a number of times through the years, and obviously with each challenge, it became more codified into this is how water works in Colorado. So once again, just to go through the bottom there, we were the first to really lay this out and sort of put all the pieces of what it meant to be living under this prior appropriation system, what it means. So actually, what does it mean? Water rights are very specific things. First of all, there is only one entity in the state of Colorado that can provide you with a water right, and that is a court. And for many years now, there are water courts in Colorado. Every division, there are 7 major water basins in Colorado, and every single one has a water court. That's all they do. In the South Platte Basin, the water court is in Greeley. And so you want a water right, you have to go through the water court process. But private contracts, even public contracts, these are not water rights. The state engineer's office, we cannot create a water right. You cannot create a water right. The only entity in Colorado that can create a water right is a judge under the appropriate court. They are specific, right? They tell you exactly what stream you can take the water from, but more importantly, it actually tells you the specific location in that stream. And it's specific. You can't say, I got a water right over here, but I've got a property that's 2/3 of a mile down the road. I'll just take my water there. No, it's specific. We usually give people the court has established essentially a 200-foot buffer. So it identifies the exact specific location on the exact specific stream where you can divert an exact specific amount of water for an exact specific purpose that you're going to use at an exact specific location. If you change any of those, you are in fact no longer using your water right. If you want to change any of those, you have to go back to court and get a new water right. So they are extremely specific things, and they must include the adjudication dates and the appropriation dates. And this is something where oftentimes, even now, people will come to me with contracts that have been created, even sort of quasi-governmental contracts, things like erosion contracts amongst various entities that they've agreed to operate in a certain manner. And within that, there are parts of what appear to be a water right. And they say, but we've had this contract and we've operated ourselves for the last 50 years under this contract, and they present it to me as a water right. But it's not a water right. And the place where it usually gets lost is right there in the appropriation and adjudication dates. And I have to have it, because remember, the whole idea here is we create a line. Your place in line tells you you get water after him, but before him. That line is a date. If we don't have those dates, I can't slot you into the line. If I can't slot you in the line, I don't know when you should be getting water or what you should be using it for. You're not going to get any water. So still to this day, we have issues of people coming to us with very long established agreements amongst a specific group of people who thought they had a water right. And I'm like, sorry, nobody ever went to court, and nobody ever went to a water court and got it adjudicated. And all I can tell them is then you have to go to court and do it this way. And then, I'll have the dates. I can slot you into the line of where you get water. But before that, you don't have a water right, even though you may have thought for the last 50, 60 years that you in fact did. Yes.
So if your specific use changes, that changes the whole
yes,
thing?
Yes.
So if you have crops you're watering and now you build a couple houses, you're going to supply water to those. You can't.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if you heard it. So he was asking about if the specific use changes, is it a new water right? And the answer is yes. Now, it's not a new water right if you grew corn and now you're growing alfalfa. That's still irrigation. But if you were irrigating and now you want to put houses on it, that's an entirely different type of water use. That's not an irrigation water right anymore. You go back to square one, you're creating a new water right. And more importantly, though, your place in that line is going to probably be way further back for that new use. You're not going to have the same date in the same place in line as if you were using it for irrigation purposes. So yeah, very, very specific things. Just briefly, for anybody out there who thinks they may have a water right or thinking about it, it's on you to figure out what you've got, what you own. You need to look through your land use documents. You need to look through your ownership documents. I often refer people to county assessors' offices because sometimes these things are put in as sort of just like public documents, and you really are going to go and do a whole lot of researching through public documents as to whether you do have a water right or not. But the first place you're going to start with is the water courts, because the water courts should have a record, at least that the water right was created. Whether you actually own that water right, you're going to have to backtrack and find that out yourself. Yes.
You have a share with the ditch company.
It's similar kind of thing.
That the ditch company would have already established.
Well, yeah, the ditch company will hold the water right for the shareholders. But yes, not every ditch company has kept perfect records. Ditch companies that are still, full-fledged going operations, and a lot of them are, yeah, they're going to know who owns the water rights. But a lot of ditches, smaller ditches, ditches that maybe aren't used all that much anymore, over time, who owns the water rights, who maybe owns the land that's being irrigated, that changes hands. You better go back and see if you purchased property that you believe was irrigated under a ditch. Go back and look at your purchase documents. Does it say, this includes, 2 shares of ABC ditch? That's up to you. That's actually not what we do. And to a large extent, it's not even what the water courts do, because in theory, even though people are meant to notify the water court when ownership changes, but nobody's out there enforcing that. It's like skipping jury duty. I mean, there's nobody out there who's going to come knock on your door and tell you that you needed to go and change the ownership when that happened. So yeah, we get a lot of questions about that. People call us up thinking that we know, all the owners of a ditch. I mean, Home Supply Ditch Company has 2001 shares. That's nominally 2001 shareholders. We don't keep a track of who all of those people are. And quite frankly, even a ditch company over time, there always seems to be a certain number of shares that have kind of fallen into the abyss, and they aren't being used, and nobody really knows who owns those shares anymore. And even the ditch companies turn around and say, well, it's your responsibility to figure out what you own and what you don't own. So yeah, not a whole lot of help. You have to do the legwork yourself. All right, so let's go back to, so what do I do? So essentially a water commissioner for a river is basically your frontline person doing the administration. Essentially what that means is that on a daily basis, I figure out how much water do I have? What's the supply? And then I go to that list of appropriators, the list we've created through the water court. And I start at the most senior one, the guy who went to court first. And I start at that end, and I just keep on going down until I get to a point where we've run out of water. And that's what we call the call. It's the daily administration of what we do, and you will hear it called the call, because the call is the location where people senior to that are in priority and will get water, and people who are junior to that are out of priority and won't get water. So it really tells you two things. It tells you who's the most junior person getting water, and it also tells you literally where on the river we physically run out of water. And that happens. And I'll tell you, on the Big Thompson, we run out of water roughly somewhere around I-25 during the height of the season. Yes. Supply, remember, what we do is we have hydrographic stations on the river, and so I'll show you a couple of those later on. So the one for here, the most important one for the Estes Valley, is we have a station which we call the Big Thompson above Lake Estes gauge. So if you guys go to the visitor center, you walk across that bridge there, and you look down, there's like a concrete structure in the river and a little shack. That is where we measure the flow of the Big Thompson River. And it's measuring the flow from the Rocky Mountain National Park and Glacier Creek. And that's a very important gauge for you guys here. We also measure the water that's on the other side of the gates of the dam here. So we call that the Big Thompson below Lake Estes gauge. Shocker there. So we have measuring points up and down the river. We also have, this is where sort of the art comes in for my job. I know that there are lots of little creeks which we don't measure, but I know at this time of year they're maybe barely eking 1 CFS of flow. It's a very, very small amount. I know in May, the end of May, they may be running a considerable amount of water. I mean, that's where, sort of, like I said, the art of it comes in, where the more years you do this, the better you know your river and the rhythms of your river and how much water you have available at any given point. And so essentially that is what I do first and foremost every single day. A lot of these other things about operating exchanges and augmentation water, these are other additions or subtractions to the river. Operating exchanges and augmentation means that someone has earmarked a particular amount of water, and my job then is to shepherd that water down the river to where it's required to go for that particular situation. Cities live with that a lot. And you know, municipal things where we get exchanges and augmentation and that sort of thing. But basically the setting of a call, the fundamental, this is how much supply we have versus this is the demand, that is what I do 365 days out of the year. The rest just falls into it along with that. So let's talk specifically about the Big Thompson River. The Big Thompson River in the South Platte Basin is probably the driest river. We have a call on the river for more than 50 weeks on average out of every 52. So the only times in this river where essentially we have more water available than there are people who want water is usually that couple of weeks of peak flow that we have end of May, first chunk of June. But for the rest of the year, essentially what it means is there's always somebody who wants water or could use water, and I have to say no, because we don't have any available for you. It also means that people have to pass that water by. And this is where, particularly up here in mountain communities, it gets this whole prior appropriation doctrine gets a little stickier to deal with, because you own a piece of land, there's a little creek that runs through it, your wife has been harassing you to put in a bit of lawn for the last 10 years, you finally get around to doing it, you go, you know, I'm going to put a little berm in the stream here, and I'm going to build up a little pond, I'm going to put a little pump in there, and I'm going to irrigate my, you know, 300 square foot of lawn and a couple of flower beds from this creek that runs right through my property. Why shouldn't I use the water? Well, when you're saying that, you're essentially operating as though this was a riparian doctrine. But I come to you and I say, cease and desist doing that. You can't do that. And you say, why? I say, well, you don't have the water right to do that. There are people out on the east side of Fort Morgan who actually have called dibs on the water that's running across your property here. And that is where not only does it become much more real for people specifically up in mountain communities here, but you know, it's a much harder pill to swallow then, isn't it? Rather than this sort of abstract, oh, we don't have water, oh, you know, everybody gets to stand in line and knows their place in the line. But when I'm coming to you and I'm saying, I know you want this tiny little amount of water out of the river for this tiny little piece of lawn and you can't have it, that's a lot tougher.
How do you find the do-it-yourselfers out there? Well,
I don't. I tell you how I find them. I find them when they annoy their neighbors to the point that their neighbors call me. You just have to recognize that, right? So understand that the Big Thompson especially, we are essentially always in a state where somebody's wanting water and there simply isn't enough water in the river for it. And so if we go on from here, say you're this guy who's decided to put this little, you know, irrigate his 300 acre foot or his 300 square feet of lawn. And I've come to him and I said, stop it, you can't do it. And furthermore, you need to either breach your dam or you need to put a structure in your dam that allows the water just to keep flowing through so you're not ponding that water when you shouldn't be. And he goes back and he searches through all of his records and he finds that there's actually an old water right there. And he looks at it and it says 1902. And he goes, this thing's 120 years old. This has got to be valuable, right? See, I got a 1902 water right. And I say to him, too bad. Because our most senior water right is 1861. Essentially during the summer season, June, July, August, September, it's when everybody wants water. The period of time in which where I can satisfy the water rights because there is that much water is really between 1861 and 1880. In other words, if you have a water right that's junior to 1880, like 1890, 1900, 1910, you're actually going to be out of priority for that. By the time we head into August, I'm usually dealing in the 1860s. So you come to me and you say, aha, I have a 120-year-old water right, it's 1902, and I say, doesn't make any difference. You are still going to be out of priority for all that whole part of summer when you want water. You're still going to be out of priority for it. And again, folks up here in the mountains, this affects you because these senior water rights, they're all down there in Loveland and Greeley and Milliken and Johnstown, which is where, of course, the Big Thompson Valley was settled first. As you go further higher in elevation and further west, the water rights get more and more junior. So, you know, I know you guys up here, it may look great on paper. Chances are it's not going to be a real practical thing for you for most of the year. Maybe again, you know, end of May, first part of June, when there's usually enough water for anybody anyway. That's when your water right would be of use to you. Okay, lost it again. Yeah, can you plug it in? Your battery's running low. Oh. Hold on a sec, we're going to run out of battery power. Oh, it should be plugged in. Okay. Cool. All right, so this is a bit of a problem now because
Coffin versus Left-Hand Ditch Company.
yes.
Do you know what anything about it or why it was brought up?
You mean that specific instance of
In that case, well, you said that was what started the whole thing.
That was Coffin versus Left-Hand Ditch Company was, the 1882 Supreme Court of Colorado decision that affirmed that we were going to be living under the prior Appropriation Doctrine and not the Riparian Doctrine.
So he was saying, Coffin was saying that he had the right to use the water, and
Yeah.
the ditch company said you do not.
I think that was the case, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't.
It's just
Yeah.
interesting. I grew up in this area, so
Yeah. The
familiar
name
with
of
names.
Coffin.
He owned the Sandstone Ranch.
Yeah, the
east
name of
Long
Coffin
Island.
is something that shows up in. There have been a number of Coffins who were judges, etc. That dealt with water law in the state for quite a considerable period of time. So you will hear the name Coffin, and sometimes they are referred to as Coffin decrees, and then of course people get deed decree or something like that, but it's actually not. It's the name of the guy, or the name of the family, shall I say. Yeah.
So if you want to put in a pond, you're going to have to buy some water rights from somebody?
Probably.
Unless you own them already.
Right, so, yes, okay, so what would happen is if, first of all, be very careful about digging ponds, because ponds intersect groundwater. And so then you have a pond. don't think you can do that, you can possibly line the pond. Right. So then the question is, how do you get water into it legally? Well, we do have that little period of time every year, a couple of weeks maybe, when maybe it can be a time when there's extra water available. You can fill it under that. But yes, apart from that, if you're putting water into that pond, even if it's just naturally coming into that pond, but we're outside of that little period of time where we have what we call free river, you need to be releasing that water back to the stream. You have to get what we call an augmentation plan. All right, we're back in business? Okay. I hope we're, well.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get this little guy here.
There you go.
Just move him out of the way.
Okay.
And my apologies.
Yep.
All right. Are we still good, Willen?
Okay. Nope, we're still not. Here we go. Oh, we still have to click on this, right? Nope. Okay. All right. So real quickly, now specifically zooming in more on the Big Thompson River and Estes Valley. Okay, two primary types of water that we have here in this basin: native water and CBT water, which is the water that comes over from the Colorado River, right? The Grand Lake, Granby, the big pipeline that brings water over. All right, so native Big Thompson River water, primarily, of course, the Rocky Mountain National Park. The east-facing slope of the Rocky Mountain National Park is the primary source of water for the Big Thompson River. The North Fork and the Buckhorn can both be also significant contributors just further downstream. Seepage is also a big deal. Essentially on this river, if you are anywhere kind of basically on the east side of I-25, the water that you're getting is water that's seeped back into the river from the associated and surrounding agricultural use. And it's significant. Those guys down there, they have a very consistent flow of water all year round. It's not directly coming from the Rocky Mountains. It's actually coming, back to the river after having first been used agriculturally, primarily. So, seep matters. The further downstream you go, the more it matters. Rocky Mountain National Park, as you guys know, created in 1915. There are a surprising number of water rights that are or were in the park. All sorts of uses that existed before 1915. People had hunting lodges, people had houses, people had commercial camping facilities. I mean, there was a surprising amount of water use. Rocky Mountain National Park came in 1915, and ever since then, they have really basically tried to gain the water rights to themselves, and they have been mostly very successful because, the whole notion of Rocky Mountain National Park is that they want it to be pristine, right? And they're keeping this as pristine natural land. So all of those uses really, they've torn down the structures. The old hunting lodges aren't there anymore. And mostly the Rocky Mountain National Park has been able to purchase or be gifted often those water rights. And primarily what they have done with them is simply allow the water right to actually be abandoned. They've physically destroyed the structures, and they have simply allowed the water right to go into abeyance. But there are still a few. There are a few private home holders and landowners, particularly around the Moraine Park area. There's some privately owned cabins there. They have wells. They're actually still private, but it's very, very small. I had done it for a couple of years. I did some projects with a few folks there because we were looking for old water rights. So I had the water right information. They had the physical knowledge of the land, and we were able to actually quite successfully go and combine these to find there's a whole bunch of water structures that are still there if you know what you're looking for. They're not functional at all anymore, but you can see the pipeline. This pipeline came down from Nymph Lake and it ran about 3 miles down to a commercial campground, which, you know, is gone away, but the old pipeline actually still is there. This one was kind of fun. This was on Chiquita Creek, which runs into Fall River. And there are actually 2 water rights there. You can see beat up old concrete structure. That was the one that actually went down to people were trying to have a commercial fish propagation program. So the pond's actually still there because the old pipeline is still there, and it seeps runs water down. And then you see in the middle there, there's what we call there's an old gate. There's an old gate in the river. There's an old buried pipeline there that goes off to a little shack on the side of the creek, which used to be provide water for a campground that was up there. So if you know what you're looking for, there's a surprising amount of old beat up water rights or water infrastructure that's still in the park. Mostly they all actually had water rights. Now the water rights are really owned by the park. They have abandoned them. They've made them derelict, you know, with the whole notion that they want to keep this land pristine and natural. Okay, now let's talk about the flow of the Big Thompson River. So this is a hydrograph of the year-round flow, November through October, of the Big Thompson River. Very classic flow pattern that you see anywhere in Colorado, Utah, anywhere where you have snow melt as your primary source of water, right? We live about 9 months of the year where we get 20-25% of the water, and then we have 3 months, essentially May, June, July, where we have about 75% of the water that actually happens. So the blue one is the average year, and the green one is 2018, the kind of peachy one is 2019, but look how different they were. In 2018, look at May. We had a very, very early runoff season. I think our peak day was like May 26th or something like that. And then the entire opposite happened the next year, where we had our peak day, in fact, of runoff was July the 1st. And so we can see for the peachy colored line, we have very significantly above average flows in July. So there's a surprisingly large range when the runoff can happen, even though the general shape remains consistent. More specifically, if you're going to look at, this is the Big T inlet. So this is from the measurements on that gauge that sits right at the mouth of Lake Estes. I'm taking the peak day for every year. The only thing, of course, here is 2013, the flood. I didn't put that in there because that would have just, you know, that would have skewed the graph way off the top end. But as you can see, we average as a daily flow rate 907 cubic feet per second. So a cubic foot per second is about 450 gallons a minute. So if somebody wants to do some math, they can figure that out. I don't. This last year, 2021, our peak was 1,020 CFS, so we were above average. Although we hit on the exact normal peak day, June the 7th is our most frequently seen peak day. If you really want to see the peak of the river coming off Rocky Mountain National Park, it almost always happens between like midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. You've got to be out there in the wee hours. The problem is you don't necessarily know the day. Usually I can look back, I can look back in mid-June and tell you, oh yeah, it's clear we peaked on June the 7th. But, I don't know that until after the fact, what was actually the peak day. That's you can see the tremendous variability that we have in our peak flows. So, of course, now let's talk about the huge elephant in the room, which is the Colorado River water that comes into the Estes Basin. Right, so this here, what you're looking at is the outflow of the Adams Tunnel. So the CBT system, right? Colorado, Big Thompson, that's what CBT stands for. It's bringing Colorado River water over from the west slope and essentially putting it into the Big Thompson Basin and the Big Thompson River. 215 to 250,000 acre foot per year, which makes it by far and away the largest trans-basin diversion that we have in the state, orders of magnitude. In the entire South Platte Basin, we probably have about 350,000 acre foot of water that comes in from other basins. And of that, about 250,000 acre foot of water comes into the Big Thompson Basin and winds up in your lake down here, Lake Estes. Basically every ounce of that water passes through into Lake Estes. You have two primary entities running this. The Bureau of Reclamation, which is a federal entity, actually runs the collection system on the west slope, brings it over through the tunnel. They run it through a series of power plants, which is used to offset the costs of the system, and then bring it out to essentially Carter Lake and Horsetooth. And then from there are thousands of users in essentially northern Colorado who the water gets distributed by Northern Water. So like I said, all of that Colorado River water passes through your lake. Right now, today, the native flow into your lake is 15 CFS. The Colorado River water flow into your lake is 550 CFS. So what you're looking at there is Colorado River water. It's not Big Thompson River water, it's Colorado River water.
So when this all happened and began in 1947 and began
Right.
work, did that upset the apple cart of water rights, or did it just go right into the system?
It went right into the system. So briefly, the water rights for this Colorado River water are, of course, in the Colorado River Basin, not our basin, because they're not taking water from the Big Thompson. They've taken water from the Colorado River and brought it over here. The water rights here that they have is actually storage water rights for Carter and Horsetooth, which in fact does allow them, when we have availability, to actually store some Big Thompson River water in Carter and Horsetooth. But like I said, for us here in the East Slope and members of the Big Thompson Basin, no, the water rights are on the other side of the mountains, not on our side of the mountains. So that's the system, right? On the west slope, you have Granby Lake and Grand Lake. It crosses through the Adams Tunnel. And so this point here, which is the outflow of the Adams Tunnel, you see the little thing on the far right, that's the physical outflow point. That corresponds to this point right here. And then all of that water flows down, passes through two power plants and flows into Lake Estes. And then from there, it goes on down to Carter and Horsetooth and a little bit down to Boulder. So Lake Estes. Oh, I took this picture, by the way. It was just a fantastic morning. I think it was like late October, early November, and it was just like glass out there. It was just magnificent. Okay, so Lake Estes, right? Does anybody need orientation? Right, we're over here. So that stream gauge that we've been talking about, the Big Thompson above stream gauge, is here. So all the water coming from Rocky Mountain National Park, Glacier Creek, comes in, gets measured here. All the water that over the water comes through a pipeline, passes through the Lake Estes power plant, also comes into Lake Estes. So we have all of that water every single day of the year flows into Lake Estes. It goes out of Lake Estes on the right-hand side there. The Big Thompson water mostly just goes out the gates and back down the river, and the Colorado water, the CBT water, goes through a series of pipelines to wind up in Carter and Horsetooth. So essentially that's what I've told you over here. Some of the Big Thompson River does actually get diverted into the Olympus Tunnel and the CBT system temporarily. We allow it to be used for power generation, and then it gets brought back into the Big Thompson River, roughly at the dam store at the canyon mouth. And the other thing is both the city of Loveland and Berthoud have water rights that enable them to take the water off the river here at Lake Estes. They like it because it's better on their distribution system, and also because it can actually be a better quality of water. And so when they're bringing a better quality of water into their water treatment plant, it's easier for them to treat. All right, so this is the hydrograph of the Colorado River water that flows into Lake Estes. Obviously, a lot more of it than there is native flow. So we can see the average monthly volume is around about 18,000 acre-foot per day, per month, which is a lot. The highest flow times of the year are right now in the middle of winter, because right now in the middle of winter, they bring that water over to park it in Carter and Horsetooth to be available for users during the summer season. And the rest of the year, you see in June, they drop down how much water they're bringing through, because we know we've got more native water coming through. So more native water, less space in Lake Estes to be holding that water, and they drop down the water that they're bringing from the Colorado River. I put them together. I tried to, like I said, I tried to match everything up along the 15,000 acre-foot line. But as you can see, right, a lot more Colorado River water than there is native water that flows right through your lake, right here. Sometimes people don't realize it. I think I say to people, Lake Estes is the hardest working little lake in Colorado. They don't believe me. But this then is combining those two hydrographs together. This is actually the hydrograph of the water that flows through Lake Estes. As you can see, volume of CBT to volume of native Big Thompson, right, at least twice as much Colorado River water is in your lake, passes through your lake as native Big Thompson water. And it's a small lake. Okay, it only holds 2,300 to 2,400 acre foot. That's not much. What it means is that on average, we turn over the entire lake roughly every 2.5 days. And I think about it, again, in May, June, we're probably turning over that lake once a day. Right now, well, again, you know, it's about average, right? As I said, remember right now, we've got 15 CFS of native water and 550 CFS of Colorado River water coming into that lake, in and out of that lake every single day. So yeah, how does this work? The native water comes in and then is released in the following 24 hours. The CBT water, they have a little bit more flexibility depending on their schedule. They also have a couple of agreements with the town of Estes Park to, you know, make it look pretty year-round and that type of thing. The other thing we try to do is not cause people in the canyon to go insane. We really try to make our releases once a day. We change our gate releases, usually once a day at midnight. Much as possible, we keep to that. Again, height of runoff season, you know, if there's that much water coming in, we have to release it as it happens. But we try to only make a gate change at midnight. What that means is that any of that flow that's going down the canyon, the wave of the change has passed, you know, it's passing at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. So if you're a fisherman, you know, you're not going to suddenly be fishing and you're fishing this and then 30 seconds later you're fishing in this much water, or the converse, right? You're fishing in this and then suddenly the water disappears. We try to do those, you know, because it is a gate change, which means it comes along like this and then there's a sudden change. It's not a natural progression at all. It's an on-off. So it moves down the canyon kind of like a wave. And so we try to move that wave down the canyon in the middle of the night when, you know, hopefully we're not going to cause people too much angst. Sometimes though, usually in June, early parts of June, end of May, you know, depending on what run of season, if your lake is full, we got to start releasing the water. That's it, period. And, you know, so that can happen. So going back to this a little bit, what's happening here is, if you guys have maybe not realized it, is that they're building an entire new reservoir that's just one hillside over from Carter Lake, Chimney Hollow. They started the construction of it in August of this last year. Chimney Hollow is, again, it'll be filled with Colorado River water, CBT water. So it's passing through the same Adams Tunnel pipeline, passing through your lake, going down to filling that. But we haven't increased the size of the Adams Tunnel, and we haven't increased the size of your lake. But now we have another body of water, a reservoir that holds 90,000, it's going to hold 90,000 acre feet. So Carter Lake holds about 110,000 acre foot. So we're looking at another storage vessel that's about, you know, 4/5 the size of Carter Lake that will be right there as well. All of that water is now also going to be passing through your lake again. It's going to add, on average, when we look at a firm yield of 30,000 acre feet, that basically means that they're kind of promising they will have at least 30,000 acre foot of water available to the users every year. So essentially that's like putting another kind of like 2 months worth of water through your lake, but the lake isn't any bigger. So chances are that in 4 or 5 years' time, they think they're going to have this thing up and running around about 2024. We're probably going to start to see more gate changes, more daily changes happen through Lake Estes to accommodate that much more water that's going to be coming through the Colorado River every year. But yeah, I think the weird takeaway from here is that 11 out of 12 months out of the year, I know it looks like it's the Big Thompson River out there in your lake, in Lake Estes. It's actually the Colorado River. But, you know, that's what we live and die on. But I think I wanted to bring something else out to you here. We're talking about water rights. There is no water right for Lake Estes. There never has been. So if we were not bringing that water through, you wouldn't have something that looked like that. You would have maybe a much smaller pond. And think about it, 15 CFS would be flowing through that pond right now. It would be just a small trickle. It would be, you know, it would not be a lake like you're looking at right now. It would really be a little pond that would probably almost dry up all the way through winter. But there is no water right. There has never been a water right on Lake Estes, remarkably enough. Yes?
The water right and absolute right.
It becomes an absolute right when you have demonstrated that you have used it.
So you have a water right.
Okay.
Now you decided to make your postal wasn't your thing, but you're going to put in 5 or 6 houses. Is that water right transferable?
No, not at all. Yeah.
It's an absolute right.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, and so that's what you were talking about earlier. It's irrigation, and if you make it anything other than irrigation, you don't. That's not that water right. It's a brand new water right. You will have to get a brand new place in line, and it's going to be much more junior. No, it's an absolute only for those specific uses. Are you sure we're in this again? Town of Estes Park has a water right on, what do we do? No? Oh, here
There
we
we
go.
go, just a little
Okay. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so the town of Estes Park has a water right on Glacier Creek. It's actually a pretty junior water right. So, and they use a lot of CBT and they use some Colorado River water, right? So here are your primary users, big users in the valley here. Obviously, the town, by far and away. The YMCA has historically been a pretty decent sized user. Rocky Mountain National Park. But I want to tell you something about all of these, this bottom line here. YMCA, Rocky Mountain National Park, Estes Park, Shealy Camps, any water user of size in this valley has an augmentation plan because the water rights are so junior that you're normally out of priority. So what is an augmentation plan? An augmentation plan is a type of water right where if you say, I can provide an alternative source of water and I can put that water in the river where those folks who are going to be injured can use it, then I can go ahead and use the water up here. So if we go back to our guy with his 1902 water right, and I've said to him, you're out of priority all the way through summer when you need this water. And he says, but I absolutely insist that I want to use this water. I say to him, you have to go back to court and you have to get an augmentation plan. And what that means is that somehow or the other, you lay your hands on some other water that you have the legal right to use. You put that water in the river in place of the water that you are taking out of the river for your use. And then you can carry on and use your water. City of Estes Park, they have senior rights, somewhat senior rights on Glacier Creek and a couple of other creeks. So there is a couple of months out of the year when they are in priority and they don't have to find a different source of water. But for the vast majority of the year, they either have to use Colorado River water. So a lot of what you guys drink up here is Colorado River water. Same with me, I live in Fort Collins. A lot of what I drink is Colorado River water. Or they use the Colorado River water to replace the water that they took out of Glacier Creek that, you know, they shouldn't have, right? But they've gone to court, they've got themselves an augmentation plan. They say, we want the Glacier Creek water, it's clean, it's right there at our water treatment plant, we like that water. Here we have another source of water that we can use in its stead. CBT water itself is not an augmentation water, but there is a different type of Colorado River water, which we call Windy Gap water, that is a replacement source. So a lot of municipalities own what we call Windy Gap water. This is not trivial. It's costly, it's time consuming, it requires lawyers and engineers. You've got to go through court. You have all sorts of people who object to you doing it. It requires dedication on the user's part to decide that they value their use of that water to the extent that they are prepared to actually do all of this. Because long term, what you actually have to do is, it means every single month or more often, you have to communicate with me. And you have to tell me what you're doing. And I have to tell you if it's okay to do it or not. And so even when you've gone to court and you've got your water rights and you've got your augmentation plan, now I am part of your life all year round, whether you like it or not. Okay. All right, so a couple of things on the end here. I don't know if this is relevant to you guys or not. Okay, blocking a stream and land ownership. In Colorado, the riverbed and the river banks are owned by the landowners. The water isn't. So in theory, if you can float on the river and not touch a bank, you're not trespassing. But just as soon as your canoe hits a rock or you got to put your foot out to steady yourself or anything like that, you are technically trespassing. What it also means is that a user can beat up on the banks and the stream beds. Okay, they can, I get this a lot. People call me up and they say, my neighbor is destroying the stream bed. But you know what? Kind of in Colorado, you can do that. I am not the person who can deal with that, because if you want to rip out the trees, if you want to build a wall, you know, all the things your neighbors think are terrible and destroying the natural, what they want, actually you own that and you can do it. So I'm not a whole lot of help for people who call me up and have those kinds of questions. However, floodplain management, Larimer County floodplain management, they are people who are getting involved with this. There can be county and city ordinances about what people can do to stream banks and ripping out trees on banks and beds of rivers and things like that. And of course, the feds can get involved in this, right? There's what we call Section 404 permit of the Clean Water Act, which has to do with dredging and filling of stream beds. And quite a few times I've had people who've called up, it's the Army Corps of Engineers, they call them up and complain. And surprisingly enough, they actually will often go out there and look at something, but you know, the feds are not going to get involved with somebody who's just complaining about his neighbor pulling up the trees on the opposite bank of the stream. It's got to be fairly significant before the feds are going to get involved. The only point at which I can get involved is if whatever this guy has done has actually created an impoundment of the water all the way across the stream, as in you've built a dam wall or you've bermed all the way across your stream. And what that means then is the folks downstream who would have a right to the use of that water aren't getting that water because you've impounded it. But even for us, you know, people can bank up things a little bit, but leave the other half of the stream free to flow. And I would look at that and I would go, that's not really rising to something that I can do something about. He puts a pump in that pool that is created. Now I can do something about it. But the actual physical, you know, and that's what people mostly call me about, right? They're complaining about their neighbors, you know, basically beating up on the stream bank or the stream bed in some manner. And oddly enough, that's out of my purview to do anything about. And the in-stream flows, minimum stream flows, right? Fish flows, whatever you want to call them. The fish and the wildlife, unfortunately, were not around to get water rights, right? So we have, particularly in the Big Thompson River, what you see there is what we call sweeping the river. In other words, a water right has the right to take the entire flow of the river and essentially leave it empty immediately downstream of that. What we have created is something called the CWCB, Colorado Water Conservancy Board. They are part of our division, but they are now an entity that can actually come in and create and have new water rights that keep a certain amount of water in the river. And there are a lot of things afoot about allowing, so they can sort of partner now with maybe somebody who owns a share of a ditch, and the guy says, okay, for 2 years out of the next 10, instead of taking my water in the ditch, we have an agreement where it'll be kept in the river, and it would allow, and then it becomes an in-stream, and then the CWCB can use that to create an in-stream right, you know, so that we don't create what we have here. But when I am doing my job for the vast majority of the year, if I'm doing my job, I'm creating exactly what you see here. A situation where we've used up literally physically, all the water in the river. And immediately downstream of that point, the stream is dry. Kind of tough, and I know a lot of that's kind of a tough pill to swallow for most folks. And then finally, you guys can look at this later on. This is our website. If you go to the top place and then you scroll down, a bunch of blue boxes, one of them says, I want to, and it says see current stream flows. If you click on that, then you select the geographic location of the Big Thompson River, District 4. It'll bring up all of our stream gauging stations. When you do this first, it brings it up in table format. So just turn on the map button, and then you can zoom in onto your area of interest, and you can see the gauging stations and the places where we're either measuring the flow of the river or we're measuring people who are taking water off the river. And we usually update that once an hour, 365 days out of the year. So if you're fishing below the Big Thompson Dam or the Lake Estes Dam, you can go onto that website, and with that little blue dot in the middle, one of the measurements there will be the flow in the river below the dam. If you want to fish, say, below Drake, you would take that value and then you'd find the North Fork value and you'd add them together, and then you have a sense of how much water is in the river for you on that day if you're fishing. So that's a useful thing. People often want to know, how much water is in the river. The little blue dot towards the bottom is in Moraine Park. That's the only gauging station that we actually have in Rocky Mountain National Park. If you guys know, you park at Moraine Park there, and then there's that little bridge over the stream, and you look on the upstream side there, you'll see the gauging station. And then another thing that's also you can find in that same area, this is a lot of stuff. There's mapping, there's the stations. If you want to look for water rights, you can look, see, again, it'll give you a mapping so you can zoom on your area and see what water rights are there. And heck, maybe that old well in your backyard does have some kind of a water right to it. And it's a very useful starting place for all sorts of information, but I would strongly recommend you. There are a couple of, I think they're either 1-800 or 303 numbers. There's a massive amount of information on our website because it is the entire state. And it's easy for folks to get confused and start doing a whole bunch of research and only then find out that they're looking at the Yampa Valley or the Gunnison Valley and not the Estes Valley. And they've, like if you're going to go down a rabbit hole, at least make sure you're going down the right rabbit hole. So it's a really good idea to contact our officers and get direction so that, you don't just get absolutely swamped by the amount of information that's available. That is it. That's also up in Rocky Mountain National Park. Some guys may recognize it. Believe it or not, right behind that tree there's a little water right that was there. And if you look at it, you will see there's a concrete box and an old gate wheel that's still there. And so somebody had an irrigation water right that they ran for like 5 miles from there down to a meadow, which looks like it's never been irrigated. But yeah, it's remarkable. Yep.
So, with our water that comes through the Adams Tunnel
Mm-hmm.
and all the drought conditions that are now occurring in the Colorado River Basin, is there anything that can affect the amount of water we can bring across through the Adams Tunnel? Or do we have enough?
I mean, the answer is, in theory, yes. They are 1933 water rights, which on the Colorado River is much more senior than it is here in the East Slope. But absolutely, we have, yes, we can get to a point where they cannot take or hold in the Granby, essentially, all the water that they want to because they go out of priority. We also, heading into the future, and nobody knows what this looks like with the Colorado River Compact. And, the fact that we're getting closer and closer to all of these West western states, the upper Colorado Basin, which is Utah, New Mexico, us, and the lower basin, which is, is Arizona and California predominantly, and Nevada, and Mexico. What happens, right? Eventually it's impossible that, if we start to actually have calls from those downstream states for the water of the Colorado River, eventually, let's hope none of us are around to see that happening, but sure. Right now, this last year, it was very dry. Granby is relatively low in the scheme of things, but we're having, thank goodness, a pretty decent snow season here. So, let's hope we can fill it up. But it's a double-edged sword for them right now because, of course, with that fire, the water quality that's coming into Granby and Grand Lake, they're getting, of course, a lot of sediment flows that are not great. Not great for being in the lakes, not great, of course, for running through pump systems and power plants and pipelines, right? And then you get, all sorts of sediment that literally cruds up your infrastructure. All right. Anything else? Okay, no. That is a whole ride. It's like, all I can tell you is what we're doing now and for the reasonably foreseeable next 5 years. All right. Beyond that, sure, I think all of us perhaps will recognize that there are aspects of how we use water that are simply going to have to change. But what that looks like is, I guess, maybe to some extent we all have to be participants in that discussion. Yes.
Online question.
Okay.
Does all of the water that arrives through that Adams tunnel go for hydropower generation?
I would say about 95% of it really does. But then it gets used, and then they say, so we've got the first one is here. We've got a power plant on Mary's Lake. You've got a power plant here. You've got a couple of power plants down as they move down their pipelines, and then we've got a power plant that's right next to the dam store in the Big Thompson. But power plants, it's a non-consumptive use. In other words, the same amount of water comes out as goes in, which is why we like it so much. So it moves, I'd say 95% of the water moves through that power generation system, and then gets put into Carter or Horsetooth, and a certain amount of it comes back to the Big Thompson River. Yes.
The additional chimney hollow.
Yes.
Additional water that's going through, Lake Estes, the flows through the canyon that are going to be increased by X%.
What will be flowing down the canyon is native water. Because what's going to happen, in other words, is the size of your lake doesn't change. But if more of the lake has been taken up by Colorado River water, it means we have to pass the native water through that much faster, which means instead of doing those nice once daily releases, there'll probably be times of the year where maybe we're doing twice daily changes to accommodate, keeping Lake Estes looking good. I'm hoping, I'm working on the presumption that if you look at the flows we see maybe in August and September and October, and there's times when there's some excess capacity through the pipeline, and hopefully they can use those months of the year to bring that water over so it doesn't mess with us too much. But we're going to see how this goes. I don't know. I'm assuming they've done a bunch of projections on this, and the Bureau of Reclamation as well. They don't, as I said, I think most of you really hadn't realized just how much water comes and goes through your lake every day. And so, it's done very much in the background to keep that looking good and under control and with a very consistent volume in it year round. And you know, that will remain. That I'm pretty sure will remain. But what it may mean is, yeah, we have to move water down the canyon a little more frequently than we're doing right now.
Where's the outtake from Big Thompson from the Carter Horse Tooth?
What do you mean by outtake? The split. So this right here at the edge of Lake Estes. You know where your dams are? No. That's it. It's right here. It's right here. So the native water goes over the dam and carries on down the canyon, and the CBT water, the Colorado River, comes off on the I guess it's the southeast corner of Lake Estes, and runs through a series of pipelines and canals down until you get right above Carter Lake, and then we've got one branch that goes to Carter Lake and then down to Boulder, and then the bigger branch flows all the way north to Horsetooth. Right, that runs all the way north to Horsetooth. And the whole thing, by the way, remarkably enough, from Granby all the way down to Horsetooth is all gravity. The only place they pump is actually into Carter Lake. But the rest of the whole thing runs by gravity. So, some of it's underground, some of it's pipelines. Like even when you go to Loveland and you look west, you're going to see two big pipelines coming down. Those are the penstocks that go into Flatirons. It's underground. It's underground for the first big chunk, all the way until about just right above Flatirons. So that's kind of the North Fork of the Little Thompson. Yeah, so it runs mostly underground until we get really sort of, yeah, above Loveland, really.
Really fascinating. Thank you so much.
All right.
Really interesting. Well, I learned a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Whiskey's for drinking, water's for playing.
Yeah.